Welcome to LEAD Live, a conversation for ministry leaders by ministry leaders. I'm Josh Franks.
And I'm Clint Berry, and we're the co-founders of the LEAD program. Today on the show, we're joined by Pastor Scott Hindel to talk about leading growth. Well, hey leaders, welcome into another edition of LEAD Live. I'm Clint Berry alongside my guy, Josh Franks. Josh, good to see you, buddy. How you doing?
Doing good. How about you?
Man, we're doing really well. Took a little day trip the other day, and we haven't come home from it yet. So that's nice. Coming from you live from my brother-in-law's basement. So I'm really pleased that he was able to give me a hookup, which is cool. So yeah, man. How about you? Doing all right in this start to the new week? Ready to rock?
Yeah, ready for June to be over and July to finish. Looking forward to the 4th of July weekend and time with family. So
absolutely.
How about you?
Yeah, no, tomorrow is my 19th wedding anniversary. I know that I look like I got married when I was 12, but number 19 in the books tomorrow. So excited about that. Yeah, I'm hoping that we can get to dinner without my children. That's my goal. So if you're out there and you want to babysit my kids, let me know. So today, Josh, we're going to talk about leading during growth. And so, it's one thing to lead when things are hard and difficult. It's another thing when the numbers are up and to the right. And, you're really saying, man, God is blessing, or there's finances, or there's more people, but that actually has problems of its own, So it's going to be a good conversation today with our guest.
I agree. It's definitely true. Vision is easy when things are not going well, right? The vision is stop the bleeding and put your finger in the dam or patch up what's broken. Yep. But when things are going well, it's harder to see the things that are broken. It's harder to be willing to reorient if God should so do that. And so there are definitely a lot of nuances to leading during growth or when things feel successful in ministry or business. And so we're looking forward to talking with Scott today.
Absolutely. So with that, let's bring in our guest, Pastor Scott Hindel. Scott, it really is great to have you with us on LEAD Live today. Take a minute and introduce yourself.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Clint, Josh, thanks for having me on. Clint, I got a little bit of the same problem as you, I think. Congratulations on the anniversary. My wife and I just celebrated our anniversary of our first date this couple of weeks ago, 26 years since we started dating. I'm 10, 11 probably too, like you, young guy, but 26 years together with her. We were high school sweethearts and been married about be almost 22 years now. We have a 18-year-old daughter, and she's just graduated high school. Obviously a little bit of a rough senior year for her ending, but she's headed to Malone College in the fall. And then I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I have an 8-year-old son. So a bit of a big gap there. But they are certainly a delight in our lives. And I've been a senior pastor in Rootstown Community Bible Church near Kent State University. We're close to there, and been here for about 23 years almost. And 6 years as an associate, and then the last 16 plus years as the senior pastor of the church here. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
That's great, man. We're glad you're with us. Really cool. Hey, so today's conversation is going to center up around leading during these seasons of growth. And so maybe together, the three of us could kind of put together a small list of what are some of the aches and pains that come along with growing. Right. So let's just start building a list. So like Scott, throw one on the, enter yours in first. What's a growing pain that you've experienced in ministry in the good years? What do you think?
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot. Again, keeping in mind, and I'm speaking from my context, obviously, but growing within a smaller community can be really challenging for what other people think. Your motivations can get questioned. People that you think are there to support you and help you, it can really be unnerving if you've had good relationships with other pastors and people in the community, and not everyone's always excited when your church is doing well. And so sometimes a lot of things can get said that could kind of trip you up, and you got to feel, how do I deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. In a smaller community, did you find that like your growth was from some of your friends' churches? Was that part of the difficulty? You're like, oh yeah, this family is starting to attend our church now,
Yeah.
and you have to navigate that piece.
Yeah, that's and that is a part of it. I mean, I've read a lot of books on growth and as churches are growing, and there's a lot of growth that does happen from people switching from one church to another. Now, if you're in a huge city somewhere, maybe you don't even know a lot of the other pastors, but when you're in my town, in a smaller town, you know every pastor in town, and when you've been here 20 some years, especially in my age with kids in school, and you know the community, you know people in the community. So when one family leaves one church and comes to your church, it's tough. And so we actually saw a few people coming from two different churches in particular, and that made it tough. When your church is growing, you've got a youth program and a really, a lot of kids coming. And when you got other smaller churches and they just don't have a ton to offer and people are looking for something, and it's hard, or run into some issues. So how you navigate that, conversations, I think it's important, because these pastors, one of the pastors in particular, one of my closest friends in ministry. So now you had another layer of dynamic there of, this is my buddy. I meet with him all the time. We meet almost weekly. And a couple of your families want to come to my church now.
Well, yeah. Josh, throw another one on the list here as we're building a list that's going to kind of be about the growing pains in the good times. What's another one that you would put on that pile?
Well, I appreciate Scott's response. And it made me think of what are some of the external growing pains and then some of the internal growing pains. And so since Scott talked about the external of how you're perceived by other churches or ministry leaders in your community, made me think of some of the internal pieces. And that's, some people that have been with you for a long time through the growth, they start feeling uneasy. They have this conflict within them where they're like, yes, growth is good because it means more impact for the kingdom, but also I miss that sense of small community. And so they don't really know how to do that. Often it comes off as complaining or grumbling. And so maybe that may be another bit of that growing pain, dealing with the internal tension of growth.
That's right. Yeah. Another kind of internal issue just would be for the pastor and staff. Like, so as things are growing and it's moving, really well, then, some of that goes, wow, you must be like preaching better, or we must have like this program or something. And okay, now we're going to like kick it up another notch and we're going to get this hamster wheel going more and more and more. Instead of like really just kind of celebrating and saying, whoa, Lord, thank you. Now, what do we need to embrace? What do we need to set to the side? How do we keep a healthy grip on some of the growth here instead of it, potentially going to our heads a little bit as leaders as well, saying I did this or I did this or I did this, when actually, no, the Lord gets the increase for all of those things. And so trying to, remain humble in the midst of the growth is another bit of growing pain that we have as leaders. Scott, what else would you add to this list that we're building out?
I think I think it's a little bit what Josh was saying, but maybe just a little different angle of it. It's again, from my context, to what you made me think about that was one of the biggest things that I hear a lot here is we don't know everybody anymore. When you're growing, and again, depending on space, we had to go to 2 services. So now it's, well, I don't know everybody. I mean, I had conversations of, look around the room that we're in right now. We're packed. Do you know everybody in this room? But then not only do I not know everybody, maybe if they're going to 2 different services, but I don't have a first that contact with the pastor anymore. I don't get to see you as much, and you don't see me as much. And we went to try to help my schedule, scheduling appointments more through the secretary. And but I used to just be able to call you and I could text you, and just some of that contact and availability. And honestly, for the leader, the pastor, that was a huge challenge for me. How do you navigate that when you're so used to being available for everybody? You can't anymore, and it's hard.
Yeah.
And people don't always get that, and they're, well, but you love us, and why aren't you here anymore? Why don't you come to every birthday party? And Do you know what that would look like on your calendar for the year if you went to every kid's birthday party in person at your church? It's hard.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah, those staff expectations change when you're from going from a solo pastor to then having multiple staff, and when you're used to kind of doing everything, what do you do when you can't do everything anymore? So maybe it's worth, Scott, we'd love to kind of hear your experience with that. At what point in kind of the ministry of the church, the life of the church, did you realize and need to make a shift in some of your job description or expectations? And what did that look like?
Yeah, I think honestly the realization came well before I actually did anything. And again, context, personality, my heart has always been to be more of that shepherding ministry, visitation. I kept a schedule for the first 10 years or so where every Friday I would visit 3 to 4 to 5 of our seniors. I could in 1 month I could be in every senior's home of our church, and that was special to me. I want to be in everybody's home. So again, as we started, it was almost forced upon me. Like, I can't keep doing this anymore. I can't keep navigating all the busyness and changes, but I really was dragging my feet. Again, we're reading a lot and doing some research about growth and models and systems and programs and things that we should be thinking about and doing. Had a great leadership team around me to navigate that. And one of the things we came across at one point said that there's a couple of things that will hinder your growth. And the number one thing is the pastor. If the pastor's dragging his feet, and I was dragging my feet, I was struggling because I didn't want to give up some of the things that I'd always done and loved to do and to be a part of people's lives, and knew that had to change. I didn't know if I liked how the dynamic of that felt. I didn't like feeling like, oh, this is a bigger church and I can't talk to the pastor. And some people would make jokes of things like that, but it really bugged me. I didn't want to be that pastor and that. And so all that being said is I dragged my feet a lot, and I really look back and think, for my own health and for the health of the church and growth, I needed to make some of those changes quicker. So a lot of those changes for us honestly came in the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe. I'd go as far back as maybe 7, where we really started looking and saying, okay, some stuff's got to change. We need to look at some other leadership that we need to add in, maybe some other paid staff. We need to look at my role and how I'm equipping leadership rather than doing so much of the work of ministry. And so that, I would say, within the last certainly 5 to 6 years, that has happened.
So what were some of those things that you and your leadership team decided that you were going to do less of or stop completely? And what did you maintain and focus on?
Focus really was so for me, and I picked this up from another pastor seminar conference thing I was at years ago, but it asked this question: how do you lead a growing church? How do you do this? And his church was much larger than mine, and his answer back to me was, you love your church by how you preach and how you facilitate systems of care. And that care was huge for me. I want our people to be cared for, to be visited. I didn't like the word, again, because bigger sounds like systems, and I struggled with a lot of that verbiage, and I didn't want us to be like a business, how we care for our people. And so that became the focus. Okay, how do I free up a little more time so that I can prepare to preach and to teach? How do we help care for our people and make sure people are being visited, being checked in on, because that's a huge part of our DNA as a church, to be able to care for people. But they just got to a point that I can't do that by myself. And so we developed a visitation team where at first I helped oversee that visitation team, but then it became, okay, I need to develop a leader over the visitation team, and then I would just check in with the leader of those teams. And so we really started looking at ministry teams and having team leaders that I could check in with, and taking off some of the others. little things too, like custodial work and full-time secretary. We didn't even have a full-time secretary at that point, just things that we weren't navigating well of what we really, really needed, looking at other staff to be able to develop and add to the church that could take on some other ministry responsibilities. So my focus became, how do I help equip and really work with those ministry team leaders and our board, our elders, and the preaching.
Yeah, that's good, Scott. I think, what was that like for you making that shift? Like, did you have a pretty easy time going from hands-on to equipper? Was that something like natural once you got your head wrapped around and go, okay, I need to become an equipper? Was that something that took you a long time to like, what am I going to equip and in what ways and or was it just kind of like, no, I know what to do? Describe some of that shift in you after you got your head wrapped around it. Then how was it becoming an equipper of people?
It was a long process, honestly, for me. It really was, because I'm such a doer, and honestly, you got to check yourself. It's at certain points too. Is it I'm just controlling? I want to make sure everything's done, and I'm not trusting that somebody else can do it well. Well, what if it's not quite done the way you would want it to be done? So you got to check yourself a little bit on that and ask yourself some hard questions about that. But at the end of the day, so much of it still for me was just a part of how I think ministry is done, and that I love. My grandpa was a pastor. He was a farmer and a preacher, and just these two little country churches. And I have that kind of vision of a church, not some big mega church, but just that small little country church that you just care for those people. And so the hard dynamic for me and just the reality to give up was, I didn't like not being the pastor that was in everybody's lives. But you can't. And that was, I honestly, I bet you for another 5 or 6 years, I would write every month, I would present a little report to our board, our elders. And every month for years, I have a bottom line of that about how I'm working to equip leaders. I was horrible at it. I was spending no time at it. So it took me a long process to wrap my brain around, to see, okay, you can still love these people by investing in these 7, 8 ministry team leaders, and they are caring for the people. It's the same things being done, but now it's being multiplied, and we're able to do more. But it took me wrapping my head around, I'm still doing the same thing as far as caring for our people by caring for these leaders and equipping these leaders. Once that period of years really got better ingrained into my head, that helped speed things along a little bit. I struggled, honestly, too, with guilt. But I really, just to be honest, because it was, our people were so used to me coming to everything. I made a joke at one point to our leaders. Let's say we had a lady in the hospital and 100 of our people went to visit her, but I didn't go. She would let me know, and it would be a disappointment. And people will say that stuff, but so that guilt factor, that can be tough too. You weren't here, Pastor, but you just told me that 8 of our people were. I think that's pretty awesome that 8 of our people cared for you, brought you meals, visited you. And so it just took me wrapping my brain around that, which was a long time. But once I did, it really helped then offer some education and teaching and reminders of what we were doing and how we were trying to do it.
I appreciate you sharing about some of the personal changes as far as your leadership and ministry and how that needs to shift. Like, you just can't maintain the same pace or the same responsibilities as you have more people to care for, more people to shepherd. It's an unreasonable task. And so just your authenticity with that is really great. It also sounds like the church had to go through a shift, a culture shift, I guess, just like you mentioned, this lady in the hospital who had this expectation that you would come visit. And if everyone else in the church came and visited, but you didn't, then that would be, a black mark. But what have you seen as you've kind of maintained these things over a period of years? What's some of the cultural shifts that you've seen in the church as you've grown, that good cultural shifts?
Well, I alongside that, like I said, once for me, again, I had the personal struggle. Once I wrapped my brain around and began to teach and talk about how important that this was, and how important it is that we're equipping the saints for the work of ministry. And now to see that instead of one person doing this, look at how many people are growing and developing in a variety of leadership capacity. We've the whole we've been so blessed in the last even 6 months to a year. The last year to 2 years have been some of the most challenging years, honestly, I think I've had in 20 some years. But alongside that, we have the blessings. I keep waiting for the bottom to drop out. Like, when is something bad? But there's so many blessings have been happening. So during all this COVID stuff, I met with our staff at the beginning, and I said, let's prepare ourselves for. I don't know what the finances are going to be. I don't know what this is going to do. We have been so blessed. Our people have been stepping up and coming in. We have completely remodeled our entire place during this last few months. The plan was already in place, but funding we're still working on. We got all the funding in, all new chairs, all new carpet, all new paint, all these sorts of things. I'm saying that is because of part of there was a teaching moment that happened where someone got a little frustrated about, well, they wanted to do this one thing and somebody else came in and did it. And I was able to talk to them to say, let me tell you about how many hands and feet have come into this church over the last 3 to 4 months of our own people that have offered their gifts, their talents, the things that they're able to do to make this place work. And we can't do this with 1 or 2 people who are doing, everything. We are so blessed to be able to really work with multiple people who are using gifts and talents that at a smaller church we didn't need that. Now you got 2 services running, and so we got band, we've got connections teams, ushers and greeters and sound people and audio visual people, and we're looking for more and more leadership where the blessing of, okay, don't have a death grip on the thing, but allow the opportunity to see others flourish, and then to really see the focus of let's equip other people. So back to my hospital example, to me, and this is where I say educate, but just remind and encourage our people, even from the pulpit, to say what an absolute blessing it was to me that so-and-so had something going on, and I wasn't able to be there for that. I had this going on or that happening, but so-and-so went to visit, and the visitation team went out and made that visit, and to acknowledge them publicly. What a blessing that we have seen more people who are able to use their gifts and talents, whether it be serving, preaching, teaching, being involved in a variety of things. We've really been working to equip a lot of different people to use their gifts and talents.
Yeah, I think you're really wise to continue to encourage people who are around you, and celebrating the pieces of that new culture that you're trying to instill in the people. And so I've heard it said over and over again, you get what you celebrate. You get what you celebrate. And so as you're trying to help a church grow, and the growth is happening, there are other bits of culture that you might say it the same way, but it's nuanced now because there is a different kind of a system that's in place there. And I would say for a lot of leaders that we're jumping in, to and doing life with, like, they do think that like systems are a bad word, that structure is like, no, man, like we're relational and different things. But what we want to do is we want to say, no, like there's a way we can do this, and there's a cultural vibe that we need to have so that we don't lose some of this preciousness of the culture that we really enjoy, like highly relational. So what are we going to have to do in order to maintain highly relational? and still be able to care for the people that God is adding to our number.
Exactly.
Yeah, but but we have to voice and communicate way more than we ever think or imagine we're going to have to. Because I think I've realized, like, we as leaders are the ones who are awake at night thinking about this, like, all the time. I mean, we think about it and live it and breathe it. And I don't think that every other person, it's wrong to assume that every other person is up at night, pacing the floor over this thing, and can't get back to bed because of what God has laid on their heart, or the internal struggle. Like, it's not fair to them to superimpose, what's going on in my life on there. So I think those cultural pieces are huge for any organization that's going through seasons of growth. Scott, one of the things we mentioned, like, before the show started today, was just the illustration and idea of Joseph and Egypt, 7 good years and 7 bad years. And I propose to you that I think the church is pretty good at navigating the lean years, like those 7 bad years. It's like, well, we don't have very many people, and we don't have very big budget, and we don't have very big building, but we're going to deal with it, right? I mean, because this is like, we just know how to operate in lack, if I could put it that way. Mm-hmm. But a lot of leaders don't really know how to operate in the 7 fat years, right? So what are some of the tricks that you've learned, or the kind of the hacks that you've learned over the years of what seems to be pretty steady incremental growth, but going from 50 to 300, that's a massive shift in the way that just do church in general. Like, it's a big move over the course of even 10 to 15 years. But tell me some of the hacks that you have found as you've been walking this path about the fat years, and what do you do with them if you find yourself getting into, and what grace, right, that God actually shares with them. Hey, you're going to have lots more than you know what to do with for this season. But if you find yourself in the middle of, like, man, this is good, how do you manage that, so that not so the other shoe will drop, but just how you manage that? Like, what have you learned?
Yeah, that I think you're spot on. Honestly, before you said that, I don't know that I've thought about the because we don't have any money. It's like you learn, like, we're all hands on deck right now, and we got to know what to do. Now, what do you do when it's like we have excess? Let's just sit back and take life easy. And I think that's where we lose some of how we stay sharp during that time. And for me, first and foremost, personal care for ourselves, our own spiritual growth. I think it can get so easy to, boy, obviously we're doing something that's working, so just keep doing the same thing. And I think sometimes we can maybe unknowingly get into bad habits and get into ruts and routines. For me, continuing just to stay sharp, continuing to go to preaching seminars, teaching seminars, talking to other leaders, and how are you doing this, and keep fine-tuning your craft and keep working on it. I don't want to still be using the same, or if we get into kind of ruts and routines of this is how I prep a sermon and this is how everything comes together. In some ways, it come together pretty easy, but keep changing, keep growing, go through different seasons where I'm gonna try to prepare this sermon a little bit differently. I'm gonna write the full manuscript out. I want to go with bullet points, and I want to read this. I want to go to some seminars. I want to really work on my own personal spiritual growth, because I think, again, I can't remember, one of you guys had mentioned something earlier about some of the challenges where what happens when you start growing, and what if you start believing your own press? Because sometimes it's good press. It's not all bad press. What if you start believing your own press, and now all of a sudden what just crept into your heart and mind is, maybe I am pretty good at this. And so we can get really lazy and lax. So I think that's a big one, is our own personal spiritual growth. Um, the other thing for me is just how are we working together as leaders, seeing this still as a challenge rather than resting on everything's good and let's do nothing. What are we going to do with what we've been giving? And I was sharing with you guys, one of the biggest examples of this for us was about 6 years ago. We were really, just everything was coming together amazingly for our church, and we were so blessed. And we had an excess. 10 years prior, I was getting a check that said, don't cash it because we don't have enough money. To now we were $20,000 over on our budget, 20,000 excess dollars that we just had. And that can cause a lot of problems in the church. Like, because now you can start fighting what you're going to do with the money and really spending it in some odd kind of ways sometimes. One of the leaders on our board approached me and said, I think God is testing us with this money. I think it's a challenge for us, and we need to give some of it away. We need to tithe off of what we've been blessed with to help other ministries, people that are in need. And I thought, okay, you're going to do a bit of Old Testament, 10% tithe off that 20,000, maybe give a couple $1,000s away. He said to me, no, I think we need to give half of it away. We need to give $10,000 away. And I'll be honest, as a senior pastor, the church worried about money and that. Even though $20,000, it took my breath away a little bit. $10,000 we want to give away. And when we started talking, we all sat together around that table and said, yes, I really think this is what we ought to do, and God is leading us to let's help. And so we began praying and talking about some of the ministries, some Clayton missionaries that we supported, needs. And I think sometimes just seeing the blessing still as a challenge. The challenge is easy to see as a challenge. All the things are going wrong. But what if the blessing is a challenge too? What are we going to do with this blessing? How are we going to stay sharp? And what are we going to do with this that we've been given so that we can still be faithful to how wonderful God's blessing has been for us?
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Scott. If you're just joining us, we are with Pastor Scott Hindel, the senior pastor of Rootstown Community Bible Church. Did I say that correctly? Yeah. We're talking about leading during seasons of growth. I appreciate you sharing about, what do you do when God blesses? It's easy to think about, financial blessing and spending it on yourself as a church, but to his generosity and give it away. What were some other areas that you saw potential for the vision to be derailed while you were growing? What were some of the challenges that you experienced to maybe not follow what God had laid on your heart as a leadership team?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, the biggest challenge throughout has been what I shared already with I really have come to believe that we were growing for a reason and a purpose, but I was that challenge again, just giving up kind of control of wanting things to be the way I thought, kind of my sense of the way the church was going to be, to the point where, again, about 5 years ago, Mark, when things were just going so well, I actually, as a pastor friends, I told them we were just beginning to talk about 1 or 2 services, and I said, I think I'm going to leave. I'm not sure this is what I'm going to say. And one of them said, why? Something going on is, financially, some problem in the church. I said, no, things have been better. But that challenge again for me to just wrap my head around, bigger is it has its challenges. It may not be what you thought. And again, I'm just speaking in my context, in my mind of the way I see church, that smaller church and that community. It's what are you going to do now with the blessings again? And what hit me was, and my family was growing at the time, and I had 3 kids, and so you're not going to leave your family just because it's growing. It's you got to navigate how you parent a little bit differently. You know, when my wife and I went from man coverage at home to zone defense, it was a challenge. I've told folks, like, one kid, that's a game changer. That's a game changer. It's a whole new realm. That first kid, like, used to be, we just want to go to McDonald's and you just pack up and go to McDonald's. Now it takes 45 minutes to make sure you got the diaper bag and everything. Did we forget the bottles? Do you have diapers? It's a game changer. 2, it's like, oh, we know what we're doing. 2's no sweat. Now ours are 5 years apart too, so we actually had a third helper, right? Then you get the third one in there, like, well, I don't know what to do now because who's covering this one and who's over here? It's hard. You got to figure out how to parent a little bit differently. But what a blessing! What an absolute blessing! And so it was the same thing for the church to be able to see that this is a blessing. And so the first challenge is just always, again, that number one thing, that research book that I can't remember what packet that was, one of our leaders gave us, was that the pastor is the hindrance, and that was it. The other challenges are just some of the ways in which the people as well don't like growth. I mean, it's every. I had somebody from it's a church not too far from us in another community. One of my family members goes there, and he's a leader at the church. And he said, I want you to tell us, like, how to grow, like how do we do this and to do what you have. And I looked at him and I said, honestly, you don't want to know, because it will involve some changes. It will involve things changing. And I don't know that you will like the change. You know, people, I said, here, let me just give you a really, really, really challenging one, but very practical. Someone may come next Sunday if you're growing, and they'll sit in your seat. You've been sitting in that seat for the last 40 some years, and you will lose your mind if somebody sits in your seat. You know, you got to be ready for those things. And so the challenge of our folks of wanting to kind of derail the thing, you know, I'm not going to get to know everybody. The things we already talked about, I'm not going to get to see you all the time, and in 2 services, and just some of the things that we're doing that are so different now. We went to a little small group emphasis to be able to facilitate the care. And some of the words that you're using, even it took me a while, like I said, to wrap my head around facilitate and systems and all of these colder kinds of terms. But I think, like you were saying, you're so right in saying that I think helping to educate and communicate, these are good words and good terms, so that we can still maintain the high levels of intimacy and relational values that we've had at this church. But the biggest challenges for us have really fallen in us letting go of our idealized sense of what we think that the church ought to be, and allowing it to be what it's becoming, and then work to navigate those changes and those challenges together, rather than sitting back and just saying, well, we're growing, and so now what? I don't know, because now we've got bathroom issues and parking lot issues and seating issues, and we don't have enough seats, and so we have to work hard to figure out how to navigate those changes as well.
Yeah, that's right. You're exactly right. And to be, I don't know about you, Scott, like in my undergrad and in biblical undergrad education, in my seminary education, there was not one class, not one book on leading growth, on navigating changes within your organization, or even talking systems and structures. Primarily, it was, this is how you study the word, this is how you preach the word. I love that. That's great. But if you're not able to communicate the organizational realignment in these seasons of growth, like, that's going to be so frustrating for you as the leader and your people. And so it seems like you've done a really, really good job. Like, yes, attendance ebbs and flows, but if you have seen gradual movement over these years, it seems like you've really adapted pretty well to communicating. And I think your authenticity probably leads the way, and just saying, hey, I've been dragging my feet on this, because then people are able to identify that. If you're that raw with us and we barely know each other, I would imagine that your communication with your people leads the way, and people can really understand, well, Pastor Scott, like, he loves us, and he's struggling with that too. And I think that really, that empathy that people have because of the authenticity can lead the way. So man, good on you in that. We're kind of to the point in our episode now. Like, if you have a question, those of you who are watching, for Scott, in terms of navigating growth, we would love to answer your questions with some of the remaining time that we have together. And so if you have that, just go ahead and put it in the comment, and we'll talk about some of that. You can help this conversation move along. But Scott, we really have enjoyed our conversation so far, and we really thank you for joining us on LEAD Live today.
Appreciate having me.
Yeah.
Scott, so as you look to the future and continue, the expectation is to continue to grow, to walk the line of faithfulness to God, and to believe that He is going to expand your domain of influence, and all of those things. Like, what are the things that, let's start with your concerns. What are some of the things that concern you as you move into the future? Obviously, there's so much unknown in the midst of COVID, but say things go back to normal in some way, and you just kind of are moving forward in ministry, in the life of the church. What are some of the things that are concerning to you as you continue to grow, where you feel like, man, we really need to take care of this if we're going to continue to grow? And then secondly, what are the things that are exciting to you as you look to the future? What's the potential, and what do you see that is around the corner that really is motivating to you?
For as far as concerns, outside of, because let me answer first. I don't have any major concerns other than the normal, just in pastoral ministry, in church ministry. I mean, I tell people all the time, you have no idea what may be brewing, cooking. Somebody's upset about something, and somebody could do or whatever. We just don't know. And so those kind of concerns, obviously there's a number of things happening in our world right now that we're navigating. This whole thing, I mean, COVID has had me learning a lot of stuff. I am a paper and pencil. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to some things of technology. One of my buddies from high school comes to church here, and when he sent me a text message, we've been back meeting in person, last handful of weeks, and he sent me a text and said, "You need technology and apology." For all the years that I've kind of improved technology and some things I'm right, I've had to learn. I have a 13-year-old daughter teaching me stuff so I can stay sharp and stay with my people during this season of COVID. But we have added some new things that I think are going to be, for me, they're going to say, I'm going on my Bible studies for our people that I've never done. And they're going to say there's just a lot of things that have been really, really good now. So there's going to be, I'm not too concerned about that, because I think we work really hard to just figure out what do we do. But honestly, for me, it's the latter part of your question that is the excitement part. The last couple of years, and it's crazy. I mentioned this to you guys earlier, and there's a part with it I didn't say. So, man, in the last 2 years, so we've had some of the hardest just things to go through. I had an associate pastor take a position at another church, and just a longtime friend of mine, and that was a tough loss and tough transition. We haven't been able to replace that position yet, and just found a fit. And so I had 8 years of an associate pastor, and I haven't had an associate pastor in the last 2 years. And then that was 2 years ago. And then last summer, one of our he's been my mentor, elder, our worship leader, a guy that could fix anything. If I had something broke in my house, he was the guy I called. And he was a teacher. And last summer he rode his bike to McDonald's every morning for breakfast, and he on his pedal bike, and he got hit by somebody, and he was killed. And just knocked the wind out of the church. His family's involved in leadership here. He's everything. He was everything to me, my friend and leader of this church. Right before he passed away, he was constantly studying and researching. He came across some stuff that he was reading and studying, and ideas for our church in this season of how we can continue to just sharpen what we're doing. And I never got to talk to him about those because he passed away. The next week he scheduled a meeting with me, and we have another staff member who handles like some with youth and fellowship gatherings, coordinating events, things like that. And he met with me and this other lady on our staff, and so excited. And he passed away the next week. Well, I got some of his stuff and the research and things, and began to read it and study it, and we started implementing in the last fall, just reshaping our leadership team, our ministry leaders. Having lost my associate pastor, I thought, well, I'll just preach every week. I don't have anybody. I'm like, well, no, this is silly. I had put a class together. It was similar to a Bible college class you would take, like a hermeneutics class or something. And I called it Acts 6:4. Acts 6:4 is, we will devote ourselves to preaching and the ministry of the word. So it was an Acts 6:4 class for people who wanted to study the Bible in order to learn how to preach and teach and do those sorts of things. I didn't teach that class really with any intention of thinking that these guys that had come out of it would actually be preaching here, but they were doing little mini sermons and putting it together. Well, when my associate left, I thought I called up. There were two of them at the time that just knocked it out of the park. Did such a great job. Really, really had a passion for it. I said, why don't you guys? You're going to preach. Why don't you preach? And then there was a third one that came along that really got involved. And so now I have these three guys that are filling in preaching. And so I'm really excited about some of the development of the continuing of sharpening how we do what we do, and equipping of leadership in a way that I honestly, in 23 years, I've never been as excited as I am about the opportunity of equipping leaders right now. And so what has me excited is the blessing of more is I'm finally seeing, like in clicking on all cylinders, and I like to say, this is what God's called you to do, equip leaders. Guys that preach it, guys that are visiting, guys and gals that are out there just helping people in people's homes. And we got celebrate recovery going on here. We got food pantry, and we've got 14 different small group Bible study kind of things that are meeting, and leaders. And so I'm really excited about what's around the corner as we just keep sharpening what we're doing. I never want to lose that desire to keep growing in how we do what we do, sharpening the craft, whether it's preaching, teaching, equipping leaders. And so in the midst of some of the most difficult seasons of loss, God has actually blessed with so many amazing little gifts along the way that have just created such an excitement of what we get to do here and to see how this is going to come together.
Man, that's so good. Yeah. I think for all of us to really embrace, like, not just the equipping of the next generation, like the youngest leader who's a teen in high school or something like that, like, oh, they're the future and that sort of stuff, but to really look around our ministry and to say, no, the work of ministry that I have as a teacher or as an apostle or as an evangelist, like wherever you find yourself in that, like, it is, if I can do the work of evangelism, it's actually the ministry is teaching others how to do the work of evangelism. That's what Ephesians is talking to us about. So if you have a gift of shepherding, in an office of shepherding, then your role within the body of Christ is to teach other shepherds how to shepherd. Now, that also means, right, that we get to be a player coach, right? Like I get to walk along other, budding evangelists, and that we get to evangelize together. But I don't do all the evangelism. I have to bring others along, as my active ministry, and to position myself as helpful there. Otherwise, I've just become a one person show. And like you were saying earlier, I mean, you're just going to burn out unless you bring other people into that and begin to develop it. And Josh, you and I have had front row seats over the years to watch men and women both just blossoming when given a shot, and yeah, so I think there's like lots of like faces kind of flying through my head right now. But do you bite your fingernails in the front row going, oh man, are they actually to do this? And the answer is, and then they do it and you're like, yeah, and sometimes they just completely flop. And again, it's on us as leaders to go and pick them up and dust them off and get them back up on the horse again. So you're right, Scott. I mean, this season is awesome when it comes to getting people involved and deployed. It's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
So guys,
okay.
Go ahead,
on your flopping point again, and these are so the guys that are preaching. It's to me, it's just one of the coolest things. It's so exciting. Like, well, I'm not talking 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I'm talking 40-year-olds that in the last 2 years have preached, their first sermons ever. And had one of the guys like so excited about, because I gave him options last fall about some dates I had. And one was the week after Christmas, my anniversary. Well, that's a tough one. It's week after Christmas. Who's going to want to do that? And one guy's immediately like, could I please have that one? Because my family's going to be in from out of town, and I would be so excited if they could be at church that Sunday. Like, he's 40 years old. Now, I've had some folks come up like, why they're not. I'm like, listen, keep in mind, I know he's 40, but it's his first time ever doing this. That's his second time. That's his third time. And so when those flops do happen, now they know me well enough. We've been close for a long time. I love to come up and say, good. I'm so glad that happened. I'm so glad that the battery in your microphone went out and you had to figure out how to get that going. And I'm so glad that little disruption happened. Why? Because that will happen in ministry. And that's teaching. What a great teaching moment. I mean, everything this was easy and went well. One guy's his second sermon, he got his pages. He flipped from the second page to the fourth page. Well, I had his notes. I was sitting there and he gave me all the notes. He goes, I don't understand the first service. I was 20 minutes longer than the second service. I don't know what happened. It's because you skipped page 3 in your notes. You didn't even realize it. And so these little things of just teaching moments and those little flops that happen can be wonderful teaching moments. And it can help them out. It could derail you completely. Like, I also feel awful about it. Like, I've learned they can actually be wonderful teaching moments to really help guide you, because I mean, you're preaching, you're teaching any length of time. There's going to be a baby crying. There's going to be somebody that gets up and is moving around. It's just all the little distractions. So sometimes those flops can really, really help be great teaching moments.
Yeah, that's right. I had one person who was really struggling, a pastor who was struggling about letting one of our students preach as a part of their experience within the LEAD program. And they said, what if they're not anointed and to preach? And I said, well, how did you figure out if you were anointed? And he's like, somebody gave me a shot. And I said, go and do likewise. Like, you got to give somebody a shot to figure it out. So, and that's what we have to do. We have to build people up and then turn them loose, and then they will learn even more good stuff. So guys, I'm going to send us into final thoughts. And during our conversation here, Josh, in this topic of leading during growth, give me your final thought for today, brother.
Scott, I appreciate you sharing your experience so much and what God's been doing in your life through these seasons of growth. We realize that growth is good, but it's hard, and it's not always easy. So I think if I had one final thought, it would be this, and that is that in seasons of growth, it's easy to rely on what you've always done, thinking that what you've done is the key to the growth. But it's really about obedience and faithfulness to what God's called you to. And so to maintain, one of the things Scott said is to really use that time to hone and sharpen your personal relationship with the Lord, to be able to sit and listen to him, to grow in your understanding of his word and his character and all of those things in those times is so important, because it's so easy to sit back and rely on your previous experience, your current success, and what you've always done. So in times of growth, you've got to be even more diligent in your intimacy with God.
Absolutely. Scott, how about your final thought on this conversation? Something else that's coming into your heart about leading in times of growth. What's your final thought today?
Let me let me add right on to that. I think in this very similar way. I think sometimes when you're growing in a ministry, and again, put in personal factors too. We're growing. My family was growing. I'm coaching sports teams. You're involved. Things are happening so fast, and it's so busy, and it's every day you're waking up like, I got to do this, this, and this, and this, and you're just exhausted. When you ask that question there, just as a final thought, a verse in the last year, 2 years has been coming into my heart. I've been just coming back to it again and again and again. It's Mark chapter 6, verse 30 to 32. And it's the apostles returned to Jesus. They told him all that they had done and taught. And Jesus said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So here's the disciples coming back and saying, Jesus, look at all the things that we've done. And Jesus didn't even respond to that. He goes, come away with me by yourselves for a little bit. You haven't even had time to rest. You haven't even had time to eat. So take a break. Sometimes when it's growing, things are going so good that we can, even in the good, forget to just take a break and rest. And again, about staying sharp. You want to stay sharp. You can't do it if you're fatigued and burnt out and tired. And sometimes in the name of doing good, we don't even realize it. I still just where I mess up. My wife says to me all the time, your day off. Why are you doing this right now? Am I in? Always this. I love this. I don't feel like it's work. But you need to rest, take a break. And I literally had to make myself. I got in such a bad preacher habit on Sunday afternoon. Start working on my sermon for the next week. I'm so excited about something. And my wife's like, rest, stop. So that would be my biggest thing right now, is just keep in mind that growth is exciting, fast, but don't forget to take some time to rest and spend that time with Jesus and just be still.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, taking some time to rest and being still before the Lord, even in times of growth. I appreciate that word, Scott. Yeah, I think for me, like, I just have this in my mind. It's imagery and from last summer. We planted tomatoes and then we went on vacation for 2 weeks. And when we left, they were just like little tiny things. And we got back, they were just everywhere. And I mean, we had so many like these green tomatoes, and they're all, because I didn't put any structure around them. They just grew and grew, and but they're tomatoes. They got too heavy and they just like laid on the ground. Well, if I just would have left them there, they all would have rotted. Like, we wouldn't have gotten any of that tomato fruit off of the vine because it all would have died. And so in the midst of all of that growth, it's like, oh my goodness, like these plants are like 20 times the size of 2 weeks ago when we left. Well, that's really great. But the pain that it took to clip, and like break and tear and try to get these big plants to fit back into a structure is really painful. And so if we're like, yay, go, and the vine is just growing and growing and growing, but we're not willing to do the work of providing structure for it, then we're not going to get the good fruit off of it. It's just going to go to waste. And so I think that's something in the midst of growing that you actually have to think more about the structures that go around that to keep the vine up off the ground, if that makes sense. Right now, early on, when the church is small, if you're just spending time building structure after structure after structure after structure, that actually is going to limit the growth. So you have to have this, like, we're nurturing the vine and we're working on the structure that will fit the vine. If we would have been home for those 2 weeks, then as it would have grown, we would have put a basket around it and we would have put a limb over top of one of the carriages. And then it would have grown a little bit more. And then we would have easily been able to wrap another part of the vine, the tomato plant around those different pieces of the basket. And it would have grown and grown and grown. But we didn't take care of it because we were gone, obviously, but we didn't take care of it. And now there's a whole lot of pain and we lost a lot of tomatoes because we had to rip them off and throw them away because we didn't provide the structure. And I feel like that is a big part of this conversation as well today, is that monitoring growth means monitoring structure and then helping appropriately. Guys, thanks for this time. Thanks for your willingness, Scott, to join us today. Josh, as always, brother, it's good to see you. And these conversations continue to be some of the highlight of my week. I enjoy meeting with these leaders and hearing what God has taught them over the years. So thanks for this conversation. Really enjoyed it today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us, Scott. Have a great week.
All right, leaders. Hey, until next time, we're praying for you. Be with you. Lead well.